Hello everybody, thank you for your company and welcome to this year's Shabbat Ha Gadol drasha. Normally on the Shabbat before Pesach in the afternoon between Mincha and Maariv, we have an explanation of some point of Jewish law in the run-up to Pesach. It's a time-honored tradition that goes back a very long way, and we also do it between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur on Shabbat Shuvah. Sadly, this year we can't do it in shul, so I'm giving it you this way instead, and I hope you enjoy it. The question I want to deal with is regarding bedikat chametz, the search for chametz. And this year, the question is, when we begin the search for chametz in our homes on the eve of the night before Pesach, should we daven maariv first, or should we do the search for the chametz first? And I'm going to give a little introduction to the laws of the run-up to bedikat chametz, to the search for chametz, just to put this in a bit of a context, and then we can cut to the chase and find out what exactly our ruling should be. So first of all, I want to start with a Gemara from the Talmud in Pesachim, where Rav Nachman said, we do the search for chametz at nightfall, at a time when people are normally at home, and the light of the lamp is helpful in the search. So Abaye said, this means that a Torah scholar should not embark on study on the night of the 13th of Nisan going into the 14th, lest his Torah study engross him and he comes to neglect the mitzvah of searching for chametz. This is what the Gemara says, and it teaches us that we are so particular about the search for chametz not being forgotten that we will even stop people learning Torah in the run-up to that night, in the hope that it will make sure that everybody, even the greatest Torah scholar in the Jewish people, will be particular to do the search for chametz as they should. And indeed, this is taken up by the Shulchan Aruch, where he says one should be careful not to begin any work, nor should one eat until one has searched for chametz. Even if one has a fixed time to learn Torah, one should not learn until one has searched. However, if one began to learn Torah when it was still daytime on the 13th of Nisan, one is not obliged to stop learning, although there are some who say that one must stop, and that seems to me to be the correct view. Even half an hour before the time to search for chametz, it is forbidden to learn Torah, lest one come to get engrossed in one's learning. Likewise, it is forbidden to enter the bathhouse and all the things that we normally can't do before mincha. Somebody who forgot to search for chametz in the night is forbidden to do all these things until they search. Now, what about maariv? The obligation to daven maariv begins, normally speaking, in the best possible way at nightfall. We can sometimes do it earlier, but it is ideal to daven maariv at nightfall. And likewise, the search for chametz begins ideally at nightfall. That's when the obligation comes. And this raises a question of which one we should do first. Should it be maariv or should it be the search for chametz? Now, the Bach actually addresses this question, and he is quoted by the Be'er Heitev, and this is what he writes. The Bach wrote, if someone did not daven maariv with the community, they should daven at home before the search, lest they become engrossed in the search and forget to daven. However, if someone always davens maariv alone in the night, they should do the search first. Since they are accustomed to daven maariv alone, they will not forget to do so. So the Bach suggests that if there is a minyan for maariv, one should daven maariv with a minyan first. Why isn't he worried about people getting so engrossed in maariv that they will forget to do the search for chametz? And furthermore, if somebody isn't used to davening maariv alone, how can the Bach recommend that they daven maariv first? Surely, as much as we're worried about doing maariv second, because it might get forgotten because of the search, so too, if we do maariv first, then the bedikat chametz might get forgotten because somebody will get engrossed in maariv beforehand. So what are we to make of the Bach, and how do we understand what he says? So the Mishnah Berurah actually goes with this, and he explains it in a bit more detail. And this is what he says. Regarding maariv, those who daven at nightfall with the community should do so before the search, because it is difficult to gather them together afterwards. So the Mishnah Brura picks up on the Bach's implication that if somebody can daven with maariv with a minyan, they should do so, and he spells it out black and white. And it seems to be that what the Mishnah Brura and those who precede him are involved in is risk management. So the point is that, yes, we are worried about the search getting forgotten, but if we don't get the minyan now, we might not get it later. And it seems that davening maariv with a minyan is the thing that is most vulnerable, most likely not to happen. And we can understand this. Firstly, it means that people have to leave their homes to go to shul, and there can be any number of hindrances to that. Somebody might be tired. They may have something else that calls their attention away in their homes. There may be some urgent situation. They might just forget, because after all, the shul isn't before their eyes to remind them of what they need to do. So davening maariv with a minyan is something which is vulnerable. Furthermore, it is possible to daven maariv without a minyan. One isn't supposed to daven without a minyan if there is a minyan in the area. But, it can be done, and somebody might just give in to temptation and not actually get out to maariv with a minyan later. So clearly the Mishnah Brura says in the name of the Bach that what you have to do is daven maariv with a minyan first if you have that option, and that way that particular issue is cleared. You can then move on to the search for the chametz. Truth is, we're not especially worried about the bedika, the search for chametz being forgotten altogether, because whereas maariv with a minyan is not such a clear-cut obligation, the search for chametz actually is an obligation. So I think if we're looking at the two together, maariv with a minyan or bedika chametz, it seems that maariv with a minyan is likely to be the Cinderella. So let's do that first, make sure it gets done, and then we can move on to the bedika chametz, which anybody with a modicum of conscience will be particular to do, because when all said and done, it is a clear-cut obligation. So that perhaps is the thinking behind that first issue. The Mishnah Brura adds on another thought. Furthermore, there is not a big worry that one will forget to do the search, because prayer is a fixed thing, and there is no concern that one will become engrossed in it to the point that one will forget or run out of time to search for the chametz altogether. The search, however, is open-ended. In other words, when you have somebody davening maariv, we know that's only going to go on for so long. Maariv is a clearly defined thing. Whereas a search, we don't know how long it'll take. It could be that somebody has a home with lots of rooms, lots of nooks and crannies and drawers. It could be that somebody has people who live in that house who take chametz all over the house, and therefore this search needs to be in every particular spot that chametz might possibly be in. And this means, therefore, that the search for chametz is less clearly defined, and it is easier for something to be scheduled for after that might well fall off the end, because the search for chametz is so very big. The Mishnah Brura adds on a couple of other ideas. He says, if somebody does daven at home and there is somebody else to whom they can delegate the search for chametz, then that's a perfect scenario, because the person who needs to daven maariv can daven maariv, and since somebody else is doing the search on their behalf in their home, shlucha shel adam kamoto, this person who represents a person in a mitzvah is like the person themselves, and therefore it's like you're doing two things at once at nightfall, and that's perfect. Great if you can get that. But the Mishnah Brura concludes, one should daven first if there's nobody else to delegate it to, unless one is in the habit of always davening alone. If somebody, let's say, lives in a place where there is no minyan at all, then it is clear, says the Mishnah Brura, that one should do the search first, because we can trust this person not to forget maariv. He always does maariv last thing at night. Therefore, we can trust him to do it also after the search for chametz, however open-ended the search may be. The Chavis Yo'er brings in another reason why we should daven maariv first, which is that when we have two things that come together, two obligations that occur at the same time, we have a rule of todeh v'she'eno todeh todeh kodem. The more frequent one takes precedence over the less frequent one. Since maariv is davened every night of the year, and the search for chametz is only on one night of the year, the need to daven maariv takes precedence. So in summary, according to the Mishnah Brura, based on the Bach, we have a hierarchy of risk. Maariv with a minyan is at the biggest risk, so it comes before the search. Maariv without a minyan is also at risk if one usually davens with a minyan, especially if it is delayed until after a search, which could be very long. Therefore, even Maariv without a minyan comes before the search, unless the person is habituated to davening Maariv every single night on their own, in which case we do the search first. And in fact, it is a desirable thing to do, in principle, to do the search first, because the time for Maariv is at least through till midnight, whereas the time for the search for chametz is also ideally specifically at nightfall. Therefore, all things being equal, if Maariv is risk-free, we do the search for chametz at nightfall and Maariv afterwards, unless you go like the Chavos Yair, who says that even bearing that in mind, we do Maariv first because Maariv is a more regular occurrence in our calendar. Now, what about us? We have spent 3 weeks or so, we will have spent 3 weeks or so davening Maariv without a minyan. How should we manage the question of Bedikat Chametz versus Maariv? Which one should we do first? Night falls, we can daven Maariv, we can also do the search for Chametz. We need to do them both at some point. Which one takes precedence? I think there is some indication about which way to go with this from another law, which is also something to do with Pesach. And it's about the fact that on the first day of Pesach, we stop saying Mashiv Haruach Umirat Hagashem in the second bracha, the second blessing of the Amidah. And here's what the Shulchan Aruch says about this. In the summertime, if someone is in doubt as to whether they mistakenly said Mashiv Haruach, which means they should begin the Amidah again, if 30 days have not passed since Pesach, then they are deemed to have said Mashiv Haruach and must begin the Amidah again. So this is how it works. If somebody has definitely not said Mashiv Haruach, if somebody definitely has said Mashiv Haruach when they weren't supposed to, they have to start the Amidah again. So saying Mashiv Haruach after Pesach is a fatal error for one's Amidah. What if you're not sure if you said Mashiv Haruach or not? So the Shulchan Aruch says that it depends. If it is before 30 days after Pesach, then the assumption is that the person has gone with their old habit of saying Mashiv Haruach, and therefore the Amidah has to be repeated. However, if somebody is not sure if they omitted Mashiv Haruach 30 days after Pesach or beyond, then the assumption is that they did indeed omit it as they should do, and they don't need to repeat the Amidah, and all is well. Now, here's an interesting question. What exactly is it about 30 days that makes it sure for us that somebody who is not sure if they correctly omitted Mashiv Haruach is indeed deemed to have omitted it as they should? Is it the fact that they omitted Mashiv Haruach in the Amidah so many times, or is it simply the passage of time? And the Shulchan Aruch actually takes this one up as well. And it says that some people who are so minded are allowed to, if they wish, they can say the relevant section of the Amidah 90 times on the first day of Pesach, omitting Mashiv Haruach each time. And therefore, they can be assumed to be already accustomed to omitting Mashiv Haruach, and if thereafter they're not sure if they omitted it, it can be assumed that they did indeed do so, because they've already had practice of going and not saying Mashiv Haruach in the middle of that little passage. So if somebody wants to do that 90 times, they can do so, says the Shulchan Aruch. If on the first day of Pesach, someone says the bracha of Ata Gibor, up to Moed Hatal, 90 times, corresponding to the 30 days when we say it 3 times a day, from then on, if they do not remember if they said Mashiv Haruach, they are deemed to have not said it and do not need to repeat the Amidah. So according to the Shulchan Aruch, it's the fact that you say something so many times that lets us assume that you're used to doing it that new way. And the Shulchan Aruch says it's like the case of a goring ox, where the Gemara in Bava Kama talks about an ox that gores on 3 different days, and it's deemed to be assumed to do that such that its owner has to take special care and pay more damages if the ox then does damage afterwards. And the Gemara asks, what about if it gored 3 times in one day? And Rabbi Meir says that all the more so, the owner has to be careful if the ox does its gorings all in one go. And he says it's the same thing here. If you say this relevant passage of the Amidah and Misak Mashav Haruach all in one go, all the more so will it make you accustomed to omitting Mashav Haruach, such that if you're not sure if you've omitted it or not, then that's okay, and you don't even need to wait for 30 days from Pesach to elapse to take advantage of this assumption. You can do it straight away, because you said the relevant passage 90 times. Hope you enjoyed it, and that means that we assume that you're used to missing out Mashav Haruach. However, says the Mishnah Berurah, Rabbeinu Peretz disagrees with this and says that the two cases are not the same, because here it depends on the habit of the tongue, and that is something that comes specifically with the passage of time. He says that the habit of not saying Mashiv Haruach doesn't come because you don't say it so many times. It comes rather because you don't say it over 30 days. It takes 30 days for a habit to be established. And perhaps that is something which tips the scales one way or the other in our situation as well. Although we're accustomed to davening maariv at home now because of this virus which stops us going to shul, it's not been 30 days. And perhaps Rabbeinu Peretz would apply his ruling to us as well, to say that since we're not accustomed to saying maariv at home over 30 days, we're still deemed to be at risk of forgetting to daven maariv at home altogether. Therefore, when we have a choice between doing bedikat chametz first or davening maariv first, we should actually be davening maariv first, because this is something that is at risk. And we know already that if we daven maariv first, there's not a major risk of bedikat chametz being forgotten, because maariv is something which is tightly defined, and therefore we don't worry about bedikat chametz falling off the end. I did a bit of sums. The lockdown began on the 17th of March, and that makes the night of bedikat chametz only the 23rd night on which you're saying maariv, sadly, without a minyan. Therefore, I think that according to Rabbeinu Peretz, it is safe to assume that we're not yet in the habit of davening maariv. We're still at risk of not davening maariv altogether if we put it on after the search of chametz. Therefore, it is better to do maariv first. In addition, we have the ruling of the Chavot Yair, who says, Tadiv she'ena tadeh tadeh kodem. If we're not sure what to do, and when there's two obligations that come together, we do the more frequent one first, and maariv is the one that comes more frequently, being every night, whereas bedikat chametz, as we know, only comes on the night before Pesach. Therefore, following the ruling of Rabbeinu Peretz and accommodating the ruling of the Chavot Yair, both these things push us to say that we should daven maariv first and do bedikat chametz next. This, I think, therefore, is what we should do, and I think it's what I'm going to be doing myself on the night before Pesach. Please God, next year this problem should not be relevant. We should all live so long in good health. We should, in the merit of our Torah learning, be saved from this terrible plague, and we should be able to daven maariv with a minyan next year first, and then do bedikat chametz, hopefully in Edgware, or even better, in Jerusalem. Thank you all for listening. Chag Sameach.